Away a women's roundtable. Just a quick note, captions are available, and if you're watching through Zoom, you should click the CC at the bottom of your screen or the closed captioning to see the subtitles. If you're watching over Facebook, they should show up automatically. My name's Imani Rupert-Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. Nclr is a legal organization committed to achieving the human and civil rights for all LGBTQ people and our families. Nclr was started 43 years ago because there was a gap in the LGBTQ movement. The needs of queer women were left out of what was then known as the gay rights movement, but also left out of the women's rights movement because of our LGBTQ identities. So Nclr was created to fill that gap, to include people in our movement that were being left out, to be an organization that serves all of us. This is our birthright, and it's what we continue to do. And even though progress has been made, the work of Nclr remains just as important and intersectional now as when we started. When we won marriage equality 5 years ago, some people thought that we're done now, but unfortunately, that couldn't be further from the truth. Nclr continues to work on anti-poverty initiatives because LGBTQ people are still more likely to live in poverty and have negative health outcomes than our straight cisgender counterparts. And the main reason that LGBTQ people don't have healthcare is not because of our LGBTQ identity. It's literally because they can't afford it. And that's why we're proud to be co-founders of the LGBTQ Anti-Poverty Network. Economic justice is an LGBTQ issue, and it's killing us. And while many LGBTQ arguments about how the foster care system discriminates against LGBTQ families, many people ignore the fact that discrimination actually happens much sooner. The foster care system is much more likely to take children away from Black and Indigenous women, especially when they're queer mothers. So not only are LGBTQ women of color less likely to be approved to be foster parents, but they're much, much more likely to have their children taken away in the first place. This is why we partner with the Up-In Project and organizations committed to ending the foster care system as it exists now, because that's an LGBTQ issue. And we know that 80% of transgender people experience employment discrimination in their lifetime. And when Nclr was the first to challenge the Trump administration's transgender military ban, we did so because it's wrong to discriminate on the basis of gender. And the military is the largest employer in the United States. So this discrimination, it's much more than the cruelty that we see on its surface. It affects the economic power of our community. Our work in Nclr is informed by the experiences of our community. We fight for our community by learning from our community. And we're going to be doing some of that this evening. We have a brilliant panel joining us, and we're going to talk about what women have done to move us forward. First, I'd like to introduce Precious Brady-Davis, an award-winning social justice advocate, communications professional, and public speaker. She works as the Associate Regional Communications Director at Sierra Club. Precious frequently speaks at conferences, colleges, and universities, LGBTQ and corporate events across the country, sharing the story of her life in transition, and she frequently serves as a consultant on cultural competency and communication strategy. Precious's activism and advocacy has been featured in Time Magazine, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Paper Magazine, Teen Vogue, and the Washington Blade. Precious graduated from Columbia College in Chicago with a degree in liberal arts. Kate Brown, PhD, is the president of the San Francisco Dykes on Bikes Women's Motorcycle Contingent, a nonprofit committing to create a local, national, and international community of women motorcyclists and supporting philanthropic endeavors in the LGBTQ+ and women's communities. Kate has worked with the San Francisco Dykes on Bikes for more than 16 years, having been elected to the offices of treasurer, vice president, and multiple terms as president. Professionally, Kate is the scientific director of research and development at Generate Life Sciences, where she leads the scientific and strategic direction of the stem cell research portfolio. Next, I'd like to introduce Cameron Esposito. Cameron is a comedian, writer, actor, and podcaster. Cameron has appeared on NBC, CBS, Comedy Central, TBS, IFC, E!, Cartoon Network, and HBO Canada. In indie films featured at the Sundance and South by Southwest film festivals, and big budget features for national release and at comedy and music festivals worldwide. Cameron's podcast, Query, features LGBTQ plus luminaries, including the likes of Roxane Gay, Trixie Mattel, Evan Rachel Wood, Lena Waithe, and Tegan and Sarah Quinn. Cameron is the co-creator and co-star of Take My Wife, which garnered rave reviews from the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Vulture, IndieWire, and is available on Starz. Her most recent special, Rape Jokes, raised almost $100,000 for RAINN. Her first book, Save Yourself, came out in March 2020. Olga Talamante is the Executive Director Emerita from the Chicago Latina Foundation. She is widely respected for her community activism and leadership. During the mid-70s, she became well known for her experience as a political prisoner in Argentina. As a result of a successful grassroots campaign, she was released after spending 16 months in an Argentine prison. Among her various awards, she was recognized as one of the most influential Hispanics in the Bay Area by the San Francisco Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the San Francisco Business Times. She received the Latino Heritage Community Award from the City of San Francisco, and in 2011, she received the prestigious Oatley Award from the Mexican government. She has also been the Community Grand Marshal for the San Francisco LGBTQ Pride Parade. Upon her retirement, Olga has continued her involvement with volunteer positions, especially initiatives addressing the crisis at the border. She opened a consulting practice, Nclr Consulting, to work with select organizations on organizational leadership development and strategic solutions for organizations dedicated to equity, peace, and social justice. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us. So to get started, we're going to do a quick round of introductions. Obviously, I've just given some. So please say your name, your pronouns, and how you feel to be part of today's Women's Roundtable. Precious, we're going to start with you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Imani, for that wonderful introduction. Precious Brady-Davis, she, her, hers, semicolon diva. And I'm so elated to be with this diverse panel of women because I feel so often conversations between women identified folks and individuals who are on the trans and non-binary spectrum are often tense and in nature. And so I'm glad to be a part of this conversation tonight and feel affirmed and to be in community with other women. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Cameron, your name, pronouns, and how you feel about being part of today's Women's Roundtable.
Hi, I'm Cameron Esposito. I use she or they. That's all of that is fine with me. How I feel about being part of this Women's Roundtable. First of all, what a awesome group of people. I mean, I would expect no less from you, Imani, and the work that you do, and truly an interesting group of people. Like, I can't believe I get to hear what you all have to say about things. That's gonna be awesome. How do I feel about being part of this Women's Roundtable? You know, I am finding it to be a complicated time for me personally, encountering the word woman. I have so long. First of all, I just want to say I identify politically as a woman. Like, that's really important to me. You know, like I know that I'm affected at work. I know that I'm affected in the clothes that are available to me. I know that that's been true my entire life. I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I think that was at a longer hair time in my life. And I think that there were some presumptions made that contributed to that experience for me. I will also say that, as a community at large, I think that we are working to absorb a lot of new inclusion, not new people, but new inclusion. And that it has made me confused about my own understanding of self. Identify as, I guess, masculine of center, but also maybe kind of like a glammy femme dude. Like, I've always thought like David Bowie most represented my gender. So like, who is that, for me in our community? Like, I don't really identify as somebody that, is moving toward a like hard masculine identity, whatever these words even mean. And so, you know, like I love to wear makeup, but I also kind of want you to see me as a fella. I don't know, it's confusing. So, you know, it's great to be here because then at least I'm part of the thing. You know, it's kind of what Precious was talking about. It's as we're trying to figure out what to do next as a community, I think too often it's like there's a big presumption that we're all, I think we have to say the right words sometimes without necessarily having the right information or the right conversations. So I'm really glad to always have those conversations. Very long answer.
Karen, thanks so much for your honesty. Thanks for sharing. It's a pleasure to have you. Olga, what about you?
Olga Talamante, and she, her, hers, and it's great to be with all of you. I know of you, I hear of you, I read of you, and so it's just really great to be here with all of you. Thank you, Imani, for inviting me. And so the whole thing of terminology, I think is sort of like, I feel like I'm always catching up to it, you know, and so, and I'm really glad to be schooled. And so in terms, and also in terms of language, in Spanish, things are very gendered. And so I don't know if some of you see the X in like Latinx and Chicanx and several X's that appear when we write about the Latinx community. And part of it is because in Spanish, if you're a Latino, then you're a Latino whether you're a male or a female, even though Latino refers to a male and Latina refers to a female. Or like if you have an hermanos, if you're like, then it's all of the siblings. Although hermano is for brother and hermana would be for sister. So this is right now, we're right in the midst of all of this because people we're like sort of battling all of this in terms of what is the importance of identification? What is the importance of calling ourselves what we want to call ourselves? And so the X is being brought into being not just a Chicana or a Chicano, but Chicanx, if you're going to talk about the whole. And so, and of course, there's pushback from folks in terms of like, it's always been Chicano, so it should stay Chicano. And so in English, I think it's actually, I'm glad it's women, and that's because in Spanish, it would be a little bit more complicated to try to kind of like, how do we really identify it? And I hope I'm not confusing you more about this whole issue of X's in our Spanish denomination of ourselves, but I think it's an ongoing process. I think it's evolution in terms of how we name ourselves from being wetbacks and greasers to then say no, we're Mexican Americans, to then being Chicanas and Chicanos, and so and then the non-binary terminologies that I've come to understand and respect, and so then choosing. So but today I'm really glad to be part of this women's roundtable with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga. Kate, same question to you.
Hi, Kate Brown, pronouns she, her, hers. I also proudly refer to myself as a dyke. I really appreciate kind of, Cameron, what you spoke to and how we're thinking about diversity as we think about the terms that we use for each other and for ourselves. I'm really looking forward to this panel. I'm looking forward to a conversation that is instructive for each other and with each other. I think that we bring fantastic perspectives to the discussion that I think is urgent and important right now. And so thank you, Imani, for inviting me to be a part of this. And I look forward to speaking with all of you about what's going on right now.
so much, Kate. And thank you so much, everyone, for your honesty and for sharing who you are with us. So to get started, let's talk about the impact and leadership of women during this moment. If you could share for us how you've seen women show up in this movement and what that has meant for you. That can be right now, that can be this past week, it can be this past year, it can be these past 4 years, or something else entirely. Let's start with Precious.
I am so grateful for the collective power of women, the robust history of those who have come before us and have led us to this time. Whether, we're talking about Stonewall, at 1969, we have, the glorious efforts of, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia, Rivera, the collective power of this legacy that we have inherited to push, the work of bending the arc, to know that there are other people, who are in the struggle, and even in this current moment, as it's been just absolutely wild to see the shackles of misogyny fall culturally. But I'm particularly grateful for the support of Black women, in particular, the women, in my community who hold me down, as, we experience the daily onslaughts of what it is, to navigate this world as, a person of color, and let alone, living under, the oppressive regime, of Donald J. Trump, and to see all of the onslaughts as a queer person, it has just been so pervasive and just so demeaning. And I feel that it has been women of color who have propped me up and have inspired me to continue doing the work.
Thank you so much, Precious. I appreciate it. Karen, asking you the same question. How have you seen women show up in this movement, and what has that meant to you?
Well, I'm going to answer in like maybe a slightly digressive way, which is I'm thinking about how I can show up right now, because I am seeing so many people show up. I feel like the number of examples, it's so many examples. And so I'm wondering, okay, where am I right now as a white person in the last year? Where am I? I mean, technically, on paper, I am a white woman from the suburbs who voted Republican the first time they could vote. As a member of the college Republicans, I voted for George W. Bush. Technically, these things are true. Am I perhaps the only person to vote for George W. Bush and then host the Planned Parenthood National Dinner several years later? Maybe, it might be. And I bring all this up because, I am just not assuming right now that Black women, women of color, need me to lead the way this year. But I do think that I have a special, like, spidey ability in that I am a queer person, and that lets me, and a gender nonconforming queer person, and that lets me have this bridge to understanding. Like, I was also raised a person of very conservative faith. Thank God, who may or may not exist, that I am queer, because I could have been trapped in wrong thinking for my entire life. And I feel so incredibly privileged that I am a part of this community, and that this community allowed me access to education and family that broke my mind and my heart open. And so what I'm thinking about right now is, like, where do I need to be? I think I need to be speaking, assuming that there might be white people in my audience who haven't had that opportunity. And that is right now who needs to hear from me the most. Where I will put my dollars, where I will donate, where I will protest, that's somewhere else. But who needs to hear from me the most? I think it's white people. And so that's I don't know. That's a very weird answer to your question.
No, it was a great one. It was a great one. Thanks so much, Cam. Kate, why don't you talk to us about how you've seen women show up in this movement and what that has meant to you?
You know, I think that women have been profoundly impactful in this movement. I think back to some of the founding members of Dykes on Bikes, and as you think about the courage that it takes to move your motorcycle from the middle of the parade to the very front of it and just say, I'm not going to stand and be behind all these men. I'm not going to let my motorcycle overheat because everybody's walking slow. You know, that was over 40 years ago. That's almost 45 years later that we're sitting here today. But it's because of courage. And it's because of courage when people said, I'm not going to stand for this right now. And I want a different visibility. I need to be seen. I need to be heard, and you can hear my motorcycle. And that's important. And I think it is the courage of those women that came before me, who I have learned a great deal from, but it is their courage that gave me and created a space that is Dykes on Bikes, that created a space where I have a freedom of expression, a way to identify with myself in a manner that's comfortable for me, that really, and what I love about that is that it also creates space for every other Dyke on Bike in the United States and around the world. And as we think about the different experiences that we have right now, somebody, you know, halfway around the world is having a very different experience, but they have at least the space to call themselves a Dyke on Bike. And I just thank the people that came before me, and I think the people that fought for our claim to that name, Dykes on Bikes, which I'm sure I will speak to at some point. But that's who I feel and think about when I think about that question.
That's beautiful. Thanks so much, Kate. And I do hope you speak to that. I'm super excited to hear that story. Olga, we're going to finish this question off with you. Share with us how you've seen women show up in this movement and what that's meant for you, or how you've shown up for yourself.
Thank you. Great to hear my fellow colleague panelists, really interesting and important insights. I think, and I was thinking about this question, and I thought there is, I think there's there is an acknowledgement that in general, women of color have become more prominent and rightfully recognized. And I think in particular about Indigenous women and immigrant women, that people, you know, like Standing Rock would not have happened with the women leading immigrant women, immigrant rights. It's being led by women, a lot of young women. And what's interesting to me is that it's almost like, oh, look, the Indigenous women and immigrant women and working class women are now coming into their own. And I understand, you know, how people see that, because part of it is it becomes more apparent and more acknowledged. But in having grown up as an activist starting in the 60s with the United Farm Workers Union and then the Civil War movement, and then being part of the overall anti-war movement and so on, it's been, to me, it has been women who have been at the core of these movements all along. I mean, let alone Black women who have been, you know, at the core of the civil rights movement. And so I sort of bristle a little bit in a sense when people say, you know, like, well, finally, you know, these women are being recognized. And it's true. But those women have always been at the core. The people around me, around all the movements that I've been part of, the core activists, the ones doing the work, the ones leading the work, the ones inspiring, not necessarily holding the power positions, because we know how that happens, not necessarily being the top spokespeople, not necessarily being the ones that then get elected to office after they've been doing all the grassroots work. But it has been it has been women. leading those fights. And so I am really glad that I think there is more consciousness and more acknowledgement and respect for the role that women have been playing. And I think it's going to continue, and I'm just so glad to see that, and not having to be defending it and presenting it and insisting on it. But I have other examples and another questions of where we continue to do that. We have to continue to do that. So yeah, I'm just glad to continue to be part of this force going forward.
Thank you so much, everyone. I am so excited about talking to y'all. Olga, it's always just an honor to be in your presence. And I just want to say that.
Thank you.
Y'all, so this year we saw a level of civil unrest that really helped shape our collective conversation about the impact of race in this country. As the LGBTQ community was grappling with the intersection of racial justice and LGBTQ identity, for some people and organizations, this was the very first time. One of the things that I heard was that racism and sexism and other isms, they don't exist in the LGBTQ community. The reasoning was that since LGBTQ people experience oppression, that these people can also actively participate in being oppressors. And we know that this is of course not true. We continue to experience racism and sexism, transphobia, and every other oppression because of our identity, even within the community. And this is in fact perpetuated by people in our own community. And I want to know, how has this shown up for you? How have you experienced discrimination within the LGBTQ community? And what do you think we can do to stop that? Olga, you just spoke. We're going to start with you this time.
Okay. Well, I started thinking back to, the other epidemic that devastated our community during the AIDS, HIV years, and of course we are still dealing with it, but in terms of the unleashing of the scourge on our communities, and that epidemic brought out very specifically disparities within our LGBTQ community that was dealing with this with this crisis. The disparities of access to treatment, the disparity of resources, the disparity of culturally competent services that could save lives. And so I think that we have had some progress, having again been part of that, being living here in the Bay Area and losing so many of primarily brothers and also sisters, and having to become the caretakers a lot of times for especially our Latino brothers that were suffering from AIDS, because there was not the cultural competence, there was not the understanding, there was not again the reaching into the pockets of our various communities. So I would say that we've been dealing with that in terms of within our movement. How does the racist infrastructures appear? I want to refer to something more recent, just to kind of give an example of the things that we still have to, I think, fight and struggle with within our movement. After the nightclub shooting in Orlando, the Pulse, which was 2016, and it was a Latin night for that club. So it was primarily Latinx folks, Latinx of color, Afro-Latinos, Afro-Latinas. And even from 2016 to just this past year, where we had an anniversary that was organized in the Castro, a commemoration and an open rally and so on. Every single time that an event was organized, there was no Latinx representation as speakers. no Afro-Latino, no trans-Latino representation. And so it's like one of those things where like, it just happened just recently in terms of like, hey, you guys, we see your program. We have to raise this again. Where is the community? Where are the people that are the ones that and especially, you know, that suffer exactly the kinds of things that happen like at those nightclubs? Who gets shot? You know, who gets kept out of certain clubs, as happened here in the Bay Area as well. So I say that, you know, to say that I remain eternally optimist, and I think I have to in order to continue to do the work. And we need to see. I do see the progress, but it's sort of like it's an ongoing vigilance. And I think this is sometimes when we talked about it's like it just gets tiring, you know, sometimes. So there is that ongoing vigilance, which is like it's small, you know, it's small transgressions, micro and macro and so on. So I would just say, you know, I think. It's an ongoing discussion to have amongst us and to have with our you know people of color brothers and sisters and in the movement and just it just it you know, it just, you think it's not going to happen again, and it does happen. And I think that's what kind of gets a little discouraging, but that's okay. I pick myself up and say, okay, well, let's call them up and say that they have to include some of this representation, basically.
Thank you so much, Olga. I really appreciate that. Precious, same question to you. How have you experienced discrimination within the LGBTQ community, and what do you think that we can do to stop that?
Thank you for the question. Something that comes to mind about 10 years ago, there was a racial onslaught in Chicago's Boys Town neighborhood, which is a gay enclave. And I was a young drag queen at the time, a young performer, and I would see, you know, queer and trans youth hanging out on the streets outside of the club that I performed at, and they couldn't get in because they weren't of age. And the neighborhood started this campaign called Take Back Boys Town, that they didn't want the young people hanging out in the neighborhood if they weren't, you know, partaking, you know, in the real estate or the recreational economy of the neighborhood. And I was so disgusted by that. I left my job performing, and I had just graduated college. I was very comfortable. I had a degree. I was 1 year out of school, and I was very comfortable performing and being in community. And I said to myself, I don't want to be amongst people with this stance. And so I went to go work at the Center on Halsted, which is Chicago's LGBT center. I was a young, gender non-conforming person who basically was very gender bending across the lines, but more male identified at the time. And so when I went to go work at the Center on Halsted, I saw these beautiful, young, queer and trans kids of color, 14, 15, 16 years old. And this beautiful Black girl walked past me one day, and I just almost, and I had started working at the center, you know, overseeing outreach. And I was like, she's trans? She's in high school? She goes, like, she shows up to class every day as an out trans teen. And it just inspired me to take this full look within, just because I had came from a very conservative Pentecostal background that I've currently written about in my forthcoming memoir that's coming out this summer, July 2021, with Topple and Amazon Publishing with Joey Soloway. Just getting my little plug in there. But after I started working at the center and I said that I identified as trans, the center refused to change my name in the email system. And so anytime anyone went to go look me up to send a communication to me, they saw an old name. And this was a year battle with this institution. And they told me that I had to legally change my name, otherwise they wouldn't change it, and they didn't. And it was so demoralizing. You know, here I was, you know, a young person just out of college, barely making, you know, a salary, you know, working with homeless youth at that, you know, the weight of the trauma of dealing with the young people. And on top of that, I was living in a gay neighborhood. And so within that, there was its own dynamic of living within a gay neighborhood and the power hierarchy structure of that neighborhood and being a diva within that neighborhood and trying to play all of the dynamics of that. And then finally, one day I just said to myself, like, I can't do this anymore. And I said to myself, I have a degree. I can go get a job somewhere else. And I moved out of that neighborhood and my life just like flourished because I was living my life within one small place. And that's not to say that our institutions like don't matter and it's not, you know, important that we congregate, but I feel that as the LGBT community has come out of the shadows, you know, and we, you know, individuals have started to gain socioeconomic status, you know, across the realm, you know, in terms of coming out of poverty, like we forget those who are most marginalized. And there's a great deal of gatekeeping, you know, at the helm of LGBTQ community organizing, and in particular, looking at LGBT organizations and who should be served. And, you know, individuals, you know, are so burnt out in this work because they give so much heart and soul to this work, but yet they deal with the institutional factors that burn them out, such as the discrimination, you know, that I experienced. And it is my hope, such as individuals like yourself who serve in your position as we create new paradigms, new modes of leadership for young people. I've hosted this queer prom in Chicago for 8 years now. And in 2 years, I'm going to leave because it's time for someone else to take the place. It's time for a young person, you know, to take that position that someone gave to me. You know, I think that we need to create more positions of opportunity, more positions of leadership, and setting the examples of what liberation looks like.
Thank you so much, Precious. I'm so sorry you had that experience. But those are beautiful things that you've suggested. Thank you so much.
I write about it in my book. It's okay.
Well, I can't wait to read it. Karen, same question to you. How have you experienced discrimination within the LGBTQ community? And I'm having a bit of a technical difficulty. So you just go ahead.
You got it. Well, first, I just want to take a moment and really affirm what Precious just shared. I lived in Chicago at that time, and I recall all of those things happening. You know, I recall that one thing that is so wild about that particular neighborhood and the center on Halstead is, and I know this isn't something that organization is working to address in an ongoing way, is that it is located directly next to where the Cubs play, Wrigleyville. And so many of the people who live there, you know, are the people who used to find themselves in dangerous, threatening situations as folks coming in from the suburbs who were there to drink and at a baseball game saw a rainbow flag, you know, saw short shorts, and then decided to bash that person. And then that person, as you know, Precious was talking about, a couple decades later, and often a white man, often cis, you know, has the opportunity to buy a condo. and when we shut the door after us, I think it's the least defensible thing in the queer community. I just have to say, it's so that's an aside, but particularly wild in that neighborhood. And I will say, you know, for me, what I think have experienced in the queer community, you know, something I don't think that we talk about enough, and this does sort of relate to what Precious was sharing also, is the way in which growing up in religious institutions has a massive impact on our community, that it directly reflects who will end up unhoused, who will end up self-harming, who will end up at high risk for suicide, and the ways in which, you know, I grew up in the Catholic Church, It's the largest denomination. It's the largest Christian denomination. It also owns the third most land in the world because of colonialism and murder and thievery. Like that is why that is a wealthy organization that decided priests can't get married because it doesn't want the children of priests to inherit land. And so when we talk about our community, I think that there needs to be for me, one of the greatest traumas in my life was finding out that the faith that I so believed was a path for social justice. I was part of like the very sort of left socialist Jesus followers, where I thought like, this is somebody who's with the poor. You know, when I found that organization was against me having autonomy over my own body, autonomy over who I love, who I have sex with, that I should never have sex. You know, that is not something that is different. The Pope can say that we can have civil unions. You know what that actually means? It means we can't get married in the church. And that is huge and has global ramifications. And I think that oftentimes when we talk about the ways that we've evolved, we forget, you know, the Catholic Church invested massively in schooling and in NGOs. They provide the sub-Saharan African AIDS crisis is because the Catholic Church specifically is responsible for running so many healthcare organizations. So for me, I think that, you know, my next plan is to try and speak directly to the people in the faith that I grew up in about what I think about the faith where I grew up. And I think that all of us in the queer community could be doing that. For me, I've been spending my quarantine taking a bunch of master's classes in divinity, says maybe I'm gonna get my master's in divinity. I don't know. What I do know is that, you know, these are organizations that are still harming us. These are our kids that are in these schools. And these are our kids that are in these churches. These are our kids being forced out on the street. And if their biological parents don't care about that, these are our kids. And, you know, let's not leave them behind.
Thanks so much, Cameron. And you wrote about that in your book too. It was beautiful to kind of go through your journey with you. So thanks so much for sharing that. Kate, tell us about the LGBTQ community. Have you experienced discrimination in it? And what can we do to stop that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that my experiences were more experiences of ageism and sexism, and I think that that's really unfortunate. And I do think that they were more implicit bias and stereotyping. But those microaggressions, they add up, and they can really be harmful. And as I think about a community, Cameron, I love what you just said, because when we think about who's going to come after us, right? We are thinking about who is going to follow in our footsteps, and how do we encourage and nurture that? How do we make sure that the next generation continues the work that we're doing, but makes it better, makes it bigger? And to hear words like, well, that's not how we do it, or you know, we tried that and it doesn't work. Well, that's just saying it didn't work then. It doesn't mean that can't change. And I think that as we think about the progress that we are making, that we will continue to make, it's important to say, I encourage you. You have an idea that's different. I've tried that, but I want to see how you want to do it. I want to encourage you to explore that idea. And one of the things I think a lot, especially, you know, within the setting of Dykes on Bikes, as we see people that are interested in riding with us and working in our organization, you know, they each bring something new to the table. They each bring something with them. And how do we harness that? How do we find something that is passionate to that individual and say, let's use that to move our community forward. Let's use that to be an advocate or an ally for our brothers and sisters that aren't Dykes on Bikes. And I think that that's one thing that I really want to encourage people to think about is let's nurture and let's build, but let's do this by harnessing the enthusiasm that we each bring to the table, because there's something in us that's driving us to these movements.
Thank you so much, Kate. That's beautiful and a wonderful segue. One of the things that impressed me most about each of you is your dedication and commitment to our communities. I want you to talk about the impact of activism and advocacy in your work. How do you, and you all do a really great job of this, but how do you make sure that it shows up for you? And Kate, we're going to start with you this time.
How do I make sure it shows up for me? I think, man, I almost never take it off, it feels like. I think that for me, I feel like part of my identity is within this movement. It's something that I struggle to even see it as separate from myself, because I know that the work that I'm doing is important. I know that the work that I'm doing is influencing young queer people that are trying to find a space. I remember what it was like to witness my first Pride parade from the streets of Market, from the sidewalk on Market Street, and what a rush it was to see hundreds of motorcycles start their engine and to hear that like thunder, that cacophony that starts and reverberates down Market Street, and to look at that and say that is a statement of power, and that is a statement of strength. And what I want is for all of our community to have the same sense of self-comfort, self-strength, and courage that I have when I get on my motorcycle. And so the question then becomes, how do I do that for everybody else in my community? How can I listen to your experiences? How can I become an advocate, an ally? And how do we bring each other through this conversation together?
Thank you so much, Kate. So let's go with Olga next. How do you bring activism and advocacy into your work? How do you make sure that it shows up?
Well, I think maybe I'm taking a little bit of same line as Kate. It has it has just been something that has been with me for a long time. And I think that it started working in the fields in Gilroy, and just it was very very kind of like visceral, kind of like, oh, we live in this little shack with nothing, no bathroom, nothing, and the owners of the ranch, have these nice houses, and I used to go babysit. So I owe part of my kind of a consciousness to what's called a cross-class experience. So I was in the in the labor camp housing, but I would babysit for the growers and babysit their kids, and it's like, whoa, this is a nice house, and this is and it was okay. I liked the kids, and liked the work, but it sort of was. I think it was beginning to ask, well, how come they have that and we work really hard and we don't have this? So I would just say that was the beginning of that kind of consciousness of kind of seeing, okay, well, why is that? Why are all the Mexican kids in what are called the MR classes? And why are all the white kids in the college prep classes? And then again, having that cross-class experience. So it was like, how does it show up for me? It's like, I cannot live any other way. Okay, I cannot live any other way. And part of it is because I also feel that I have had the privilege of a cross-class experience. I did go to college, and I did learn, and I did see, and I did analyze, and I understand that it is a class system, and that it is a patriarchal system, and that it is, a racist system, and it's like, and there are the economic forces that affect our communities. And so even, in as small as it could be, to like, well, I think we need to pay more per box of what we're picking today, kind of thinking that. And then the United Farm Workers came along and said, yes, people should be getting paid more. And like, okay, sign me up. I'm there. going from that kind of just your own personal consciousness of like something doesn't seem right, and then others around you also saying that and saying we have to get together to do this. And it's a real simple, I think, lesson of organizing. It's like, we got to do this together. You cannot do it alone. You have to get together with other people that agree with you. You have to get together with people that are suffering the same thing you're suffering, so that you act in your own self-interest to change something. And so that has been, again, throughout the various decades, which is 7 for me now, that I have lived. I'm glad that has been my North Star, and I'm glad to also continue to see the regeneration of the new leaders. And I see that with Chicana Latina Foundation, where I just, retired 2.5 years ago. And these are the young Latina social justice leaders, and it's like, I don't know how the people live, frankly, because I sort of feel like, how else can you live in the world, aside from having this activism and this advocacy that we have to continue to do in order to form that beloved community that, just so our leaders have always talked about. And it's like, so it shows up. Okay, I'll say, and I'm not trying to be flippant. It shows up whether I want it to or not, because it's just like, it's just gonna be there, because I cannot not see. I cannot not see anymore. What I have seen, I cannot not see. So I will see the injustice. I will see the repression. I will see the exclusions, and all of that.
Thank you so much, Olga. Precious, what about you? How does activism and advocacy show up in your work? How do you make sure that it shows up in your work?
Well, I wholly agree with Olga. So I'm a very spiritual person. And in terms of my astrology, the day I was born, November 19th, is the day of the reformer. So it's written in my astrological chart in general. So it is in my nature, and it's something that I've always done, even, before I knew what I was doing. When I was in high school, I was walking fierce and being queer, but not putting a label on it, not knowing what it was. And this makes me think of that names speak to identity, names speak to origin. And one of the things that it draws me to is that we as queer folks, before we think about activating in the modern world, we have the power to activate ourselves. And one of the most powerful things that I think about being queer is the power to name ourselves. Of when, I come from this very broken background, as Cameron was talking about, this very stringent Pentecostal background where they're like, don't put your watch on this hand. You need to, pray the gay away. And you have all of these demons in you. And I would be at these altars and I'd be like, God, please heal me. I don't want to go to hell. But then the moment when I had the greatest awakening of my life, I named myself Precious. And I think that was a self-fulfilling prophecy in itself. But in terms of activism, it's about legacy. And I think that's the other part of naming, that queer folks, we often name ourselves after iconic things because we want to be remembered. Our community, has been put in the shadows for so long. But for me, it's about building a legacy at the end of my life. And I want there to be work that, lives on past my life. And my career reflects that. And, I've worked with LGBT young people. I've worked in higher education. And I had this thing in 2016 and I was like, well, I can keep doing this. I can keep working in diversity, equity, inclusion and higher education, or I can go do something else in a different area of diversity that I haven't done, that I know nothing about. And I went to go work for the Sierra Club and everyone was like, what the hell? They're like, what are you? I'm like, this is so important. I'm like, clean air, clean energy, and clean water. That's important. important. And people just didn't understand that. They just saw me in one box. They would just like see my work when I'd be doing something like with the queer community. But when I would be mentoring, students on how to fill out college applications, they didn't see the worth, in doing something like that. But for me, it's just as like a part of my life, and, ever evolving, and my husband and I both share parts of our journey for progress sake. And it's just, I want to inspire young people, like queer people who I saw, there was a myriad of folks in the real world, that I would be like watching, like in secret when I was a kid, and I was like so inspired by their visibility. And so like Olga, it just like runs. And there are times where sometimes I'm like, I run for it. I run from it. I'm like, oh, not again. What did I commit myself to? I'm like, not again. You know what I mean? I'm like, what did I sign myself up for? But then after I'm doing it, I'm like, this is my life. This is my purpose.
Thank you so much, Precious.
Thank you.
Cameron, same question to you. Let's talk about the impact that activism and advocacy has in your work. How do you make sure that it shows up?
I don't think it's so different from the rest of the folks on this panel. I will say for me, I could describe it like it's so visceral for me because I work in the entertainment industry, which if I'm in a very self-judgy mood, I can feel is very vapid. But my whole job, my whole life really, it's like there's the larger thing entering this industry or this institution or whatever it is. I've always found myself, I'm like part of it, but I'm also off to the side, sort of building a little machine that's going to divert some of the power away from that thing. And I just find myself full of ideas of how to do this. And it's not, and I say this because it's not always like writ large, massive thing. Imani, you and I know each other because I went on tour. I don't even know when this was, a couple of years ago. I was playing theaters. I thought to myself, can I find local community organizations in all of the places that I'm going to come appear with me on stage and talk about the work that they do, because people line up to meet me after shows and they thank me for being there. And I'm like, yo, straight up, I'm leaving tomorrow. Like, I have done almost nothing in your community. Like, I'm so glad that you had a chill time, but like, allow me to direct you to the people who actually live here and are continuing to do the work, but like, that is, sometimes it's just your whole job. I see my whole job as just making the portal, it really is like, okay, I know people that volunteered their time. I pitched them. I want to make a special about sexual assault called Rape Jokes. 100% of the proceeds will go to RAINN. I knew people to make the website. I could get RAINN on the phone. It doesn't even go to me. It's like the website actually just goes to their bank account. Because I just had the ability to make the portal, and that has been various sizes. That's a very large size of a thing, but it could look like, in a hiring practice when I was a boss, making sure I hired people who literally were a few credits away from being able to join their guilds who were queer people. And so now they will continue to have greater job. They will continue to have greater access to jobs for the rest of their careers. I gave them a kind of crappy, low-paying job because that was on a streaming service where we didn't have a ton of money. But but thinking, what is the little portal I can build? What's the little machine I can build that keeps these people going? And because I trust other people to have their own backs, I'm not here to save you. That's literally what my book is called, Save Yourself. I'm not here to save you, but I am here to do my little job, which is to tinker the thing in the corner. And just during the pandemic, this is a final thing I'll say, just during the pandemic, I have used my Venmo to divert $25,000 to artists, theater company, and independent bookstores. That's not because I'm personally spending that money, but because I'm hosting events where people are donating $1, $5, $10. And so, you know, whatever your level of the thing is, it's not necessarily about how can I be my experience is that it's not about how can I like set up all the dominoes. It's like, could I provide the dominoes?
Mhm.
And so that's really where I'm at.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for sharing so much. I saw a question in the chat about really how to get involved, how we can, what can we do? And you're all found a way to impact your community, and you've done in your work, finding what it is you need and making that possible for other folks. You know, thank you so much for doing that. I know that we're right at time, but I want to give you all an opportunity to give a final word, but I also would like to offer an opportunity. So over the, you know, a lot of times over the past month, the past 9 months, the past 4 years, whatever your time is, we've been talking about how we need to be better. And one thing that we've seen is resilience. And sometimes when we have these conversations, we focus on everything that's gone wrong, but forgotten that, y'all, like, we've gotten through some things. And so how did you do that? And I want you to share, what are you doing for yourself? What keeps you full? Or what can you commit to doing to yourself? And then also, because we are short on time, I'll keep you just a little while longer and ask you one more question. Let's start with Precious.
You asked me what keeps me full. Was that the question, Imani?
What keeps you full? We've seen a lot of resilience. What keeps you full?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a natural born optimist, and it's in my nature, but self-care is community care. And I mean, I love stuff like this. Like, I love my community. I mean, I'm leaving like so full. There's so much that I'm just gonna like pull out of this like conversation and digest myself. But I think self-care is so, you know, important, you know, taking care of me. I think sometimes as a queer community, we don't talk enough about mental health. For me, taking care of my mental and spiritual health, of just being of sound mind, for me, like, that is like such a privilege. And I always am ensuring, you know, that I have an outlet, you know, to be of sound mind, whatever that is. If it's a film, if it's a podcast, you know, if it's the most wonderful bath, you know, if it's like taking, you know, a walk, if it's talking on the phone, you know, to a friend. But in these times, I think it's so important to take care of ourselves. And I just want to address the question in the question box. Someone just asked that they don't know where to start. They want to be an activist and they want to get involved. And I just say, start in your local community. I think sometimes when we say the word activist, people think it's so lofty and I have to do the biggest thing to make a difference. And it's about making impact within your own sphere of influence. Like I just said, talking about self-care. How can you, you know, support a friend? How can you support, you know, a local community initiative? And there are tons of them out there. Cameron was talking about it earlier. We always don't have to start something new. You know, there's tons of stuff out there happening. So thank you so much for having me a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. And Kate, what about you? How do you take care of yourself and what keeps you full?
Getting on my motorcycle, literally just getting on my motorcycle, tunes in my helmet, you know, just getting out and taking a moment to center myself in the environment, to you know, engage in my senses. There's the visual aspect of motorcycle riding. There is the smell that happens because you're, you know, riding through redwood trees and, you know, you're up in the mountains or whatever. It just, you're so in tune with what's happening around you that is very different than driving a car. I mean, there's just no there's no other way of saying it. But that to me is filling, and that to me is grounding. And I think that to me reminds me why I do what I do, because I'm with Dykes on Bikes because I love motorcycle riding. I love the community, but I also remember that the community is also built with the help of the people around us. You know, it took us a saga of 13 years to register our name Dykes on Bikes, and then our logo be Dykes on Bikes, because it had Dykes on Bikes in it, and people at the Patent Trademark Office thought that was disparaging, like 13-year saga. But we did it with the help of our friends, of Nclr, of Brooke Oliver at 50 Balmy, of everybody who donated their time and energy to ensure that we could use the name Dykes on Bikes for nonprofit use, that it was an act of political speech. So when I'm riding around and I'm acknowledging that my body and my soul feels good, that I love being a dyke on a bike, it reminds me of all the hard work we give to each other, and that support is incredible, and that support that we provide, because we have a skill set that's needed. And that's how I feel myself. I'll stop there.
I love it. Olga, what about you? How do you keep yourself full?
Definitely a lot of walking. I'm really blessed that I live here in Pacifica, right by the coast, and have come to appreciate more and more and more the fact that I have that luxury, as opposed to, you know, so many families that live in apartments and in crowded buildings, and then with the shelter in place, they're not able to go outside. So I feel like I'm glad to take that blessing on. And I'll just digress just a tiny bit to say that those of us, we call ourselves veteranas. You know, we've been around. Okay, so I just turned 71, and it's kind of like we reflect on the fact that we have not been that good at taking care of ourselves, basically, and that we want to give a better modeling to the younger people. And I appreciate what everybody does. And Precious, I'm so glad that you take that spiritual part. I think a lot of times in our kind of like very straight up political stuff, it's like we didn't have time to take care of the spiritual. We didn't have time to take care of all the personal and emotional and mental well-being that we needed. And I sort of feel like I'm catching up to it fast as I can. And I also, again, learning from a lot of the young people. So I think aside from doing the physical things like going on walks, whatever it is, ride on the motorcycle. I want to ride your motorcycle, okay? Well, I don't ride one, so I have to ride with you. I think my girlfriend will be okay with that. She's riding on other motorcycles. But I think that it's also starting with the consciousness of it. It's starting with the consciousness that it's not self-involved, because there's an element of that, at least that I grew up with in my political life. There's like, you're self-involved if you're like worried so much about yourself. And we did want to go get out of that me thing, but it is sort of like, well, you got to have a little bit of me, So I think having that consciousness first. And I think in terms of overall what keeps me full, it is exactly having this connections with all of you, having the connection, working to free the kids from the border, which we're gonna be having some actions coming up soon, and I'm gonna be sending all of you specific information about it, but it is coming up. And so it is like, that's what keeps me full. And aside from that, I'm a big party girl. So I now have smaller parties. My last party, for my 70th last year, there were 100 people at my little house here. So if I can party, I will party, and everyone will tell you that. Again, much smaller, and also, it's being conscientious of how much I can party now. So. But I'll just leave one last thing. I know I want to encourage people to be really, relentless and fierce with our opponents, and be very gentle and kind to yourself and to those on our side of the movement. in all the calling out and all that other stuff that happens. And it's just like, let's remind ourselves who's in the trenches with us, who's on this side of the trenches, and let's amass all of us that are there and be kind and gentle and compassionate, and be sweet to each other.
I love that. Thank you so much. Cameron, last up, what keeps you full? And any last words?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you to everybody on this panel for the work that you do. Really, heavens to Betsy. And this is what I think it actually is. I made a promise to myself a couple of years ago that I don't say anything on the internet that I haven't told a friend. I have been working on my friendships really deliberately. I went through an extremely painful divorce, and one of the best side effects of that pain is that I was too sad to not tell people how I felt. And I think it's incredible, the friendships that I have in it. And it does relate to what Olga's talking about. I think that very often I put the pressure on myself to be able to, like, I don't even know, like I'm doing it myself. I'm making it, throw it all away. Throw that whole path away. We're not doing it ourselves. We're doing it together, and we're doing it with love and support, and with people really knowing how we're doing, and not how, my Instagram looks, but like calling friends at this time and like really talking to people. So that's it. I'm so glad I have friends. I would like to be your new friend to the people on this that I didn't know before this. Imani, we're already friends.
Y'all, thank you so much. I know it's getting late, and so I want to let you all enjoy the rest of your night. But you all are amazing. I want to thank you, our panelists, for your insight, your vulnerability, and just your overall brilliance. Y'all are amazing. And I just want to leave you with something too. We know the process to equity, it's slow, but we're moving. Just yesterday, Nclr got some news about one of our cases when the Supreme Court denied a cert petition about Indiana's obligation to recognize same-sex spouses and different sex spouses equally on the child's birth certificate. This is really good news, and I know that's a bit confusing, but it means that Indiana will have to recognize same-sex spouses on the birth certificates of their children. But that also meant that before yesterday, that Indiana refused to place same-sex spouses on their children's birth certificates as they do for different sex spouses. This means that 5 years after marriage equality, there were still places in this country that didn't treat LGBTQ couples the same as non-LGBTQ couples. This wasn't the most flashy case, not like the other ones we've seen, but this decision affirms that LGBTQ couples are to be treated equally under the law. And that's what we're doing at Nclr. That's why we do what we do. That's why we all do what we do. You can find out more about our work and our campaign to get to access system change and lived equality for everyone. You can find out more at nclrights.org. Again, I'm Imani Rupert-Gordon. It was an honor to share the evening with all of you. Let's get to liberation together. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you, Imani.
Thanks, y'all.